Hey everybody, my name is PJ and I hail from Buffalo, New York, so I think I'm one of the farthest traveled people for this conference. I work at a company called Git Butler. Today we're going to talk about why it's still important to maintain skills with various developer tools, especially, in this day and age, and in this case, Git. So real quick, Git Butler, just so you know, Git Butler is what Git would look like if it was designed today. Visual workflows, parallel changes, less branch chaos. We make Git feel modern, so if you want to check it out, it is free. We have a desktop app and a CLI, so whatever flavor of Git you prefer, we have an offering for you. We're also super well known for doing a lot of karaoke. The guy with the hat on is actually our CEO and founder. So, a brief history. In the olden times, over 30 years ago, options for version control and code collaboration were staggeringly small. If you had a project that had widespread developers geographically, like not everyone was in the same place, and there were a lot of software changes, well, suddenly you had to pass around patches and reapply them once you had them, and this led to a lot of issues because there was no easy way to do this. There was no cloud. There was no way to make sure you had everything right. So you got out of date code, you got collisions in code, you would build things that suddenly didn't make sense once you got the new patch. It really slowed down the whole software cycle. And you'll notice I didn't say software life cycle because there was no life. There was just emails, lots of emails between people. So there were tools like SVN, also known as Subversion, and CVS, which is not the American pharmacy, but concurrent version systems. But they had to be hosted somewhere. And like I said, cloud was not a thing. This is the 90s and the early 2000s. So when it came to projects, people were emailing patches back and forth and occasionally mailing jump drives, which included things like zip drives. How many people remember zip drives? Yeah, then every time the number gets a little bit smaller, it's very depressing for me. Or once we could actually like rip and burn CDs, we would burn CDs and pass them back and forth to each other. So you could see how it could take hours or weeks or months just to get the latest changes on your machine. Um, Along comes the year 2000 and everything changed. Everything was great and we solved all of our problems. End of talk. Just kidding. But at that time, the Linux kernel was really beginning to get huge, and they started using a project called BitKeeper. This was a huge innovation. Things went fairly smoothly for a little while there. It seems like something could be built, and it would finally help people to send it out to the group. They could get their things in fairly real time without using jump drives, without sending patches via email. They could just FTP to move the code back and forth. So FTP, the file transfer protocol. We all remember FTP, right? Maybe some of you know SFTP. Still around, still works, just saying. But, back then it was like there are just tons of collisions because people would FTP at the same time, or that server that you had to dial into wouldn't be available immediately because someone else was using it. So it sped things up, it made things better, but it was still really kind of problematic. Unfortunately, while this is a great boon for the Linux community, the company that owned BitKeeper eventually said, "Hey, Linux kernel folks, we can't just keep letting you use this for free. Like, we need to charge for this. So pay us or find another way." To be clear, this is not an anti capitalist rant. This is not about companies wanting to make money and they shouldn't. I'm not here to talk about that. Also, there were a lot more political things going on with BitKeeper and the Linux community at the time, but this is a brief history, so I'm happy to talk about that later. But what do good open source developers do when faced with the idea of paying for something or finding a new solution? They get to coding. So, something fast, straightforward, focused on branches and fully distributed, and able to handle a large project like the Linux kernel. Those were the specs for building Git in 2005 and making it what it is today. So, I'm not here to glaze anybody's ego. No one person came up with or developed Git. Not even this guy. And he's not really that great of a guy. He's kind of a jerk. But it did, however, require some domain specific knowledge just to use it. It was a command line tool, which was super common at the time. Most people, that's how they moved things around. That's how you FTP'd things. That's how you dealt with most things you did. It had a wide command set of instructions. And not long after its inception, it had a place to keep all of the code that you were trying to move back and forth just by doing simple things. And I'll get to that in just a second. At the time of Git's inception, though, there were not tons of repos or places to keep the code. It had to be kept track of a lot with an uncertain future and no real home. There was no there were no forges at the time. So essentially, a lot of these things were being kept on like an old Dell Blade server in a closet somewhere. The entire Linux kernel. Sounds completely safe, right? So modern Git hosting strategies really began around the same time as Git. GitHub happened to back the right horse at the right time. They started in 2004, and they weren't sure if they'd use Mercurial or if they'd use some of the other solutions. Git seemed really good, and all these Linux nerds were really into it. So if you want to know more about that, there's a great talk by our founder, who's also one of the co-founders of GitHub, called "Why GitHub Really Won," and it's at the URL here. You can read all about it. Scott's a very entertaining writer. Um, Now, the interesting thing is Git is 90% of the market today. GitHub had very few competitors at the beginning. No one was thinking, oh, we should have cloud repos, but they realized that the value wasn't just the Linux kernel and just having people have a place to keep their code. You could actually share code. You could have entire teams share code. You could have entire companies share code. And this changed the whole dynamic, especially because they attached themselves to the world of open source. Git and GitHub became the ultimate tool set that nearly every developer was using. And it makes sense. A tool that's easy to use and simple enough for everyone to onboard quickly. It's how every software experience should be. As building applications became a little more complex, so did our use of Git and the forges that exist. Things like GitLab and Bitbucket grew from the foundations of GitHub and expanded to things like CI integration and integration in DevOps and observability. But at the heart of things, Git remained the way to control the versions of our software. Yet, most developers were still at the beginning of their Git phase. They rarely were using the advanced functionality to avoid conflicts or other issues that might occur. They lacked Git fluency. And things like removing a local repo and recloning it, which is a really bad habit. I can't really emphasize how bad of a habit that is. When you get into trouble and you're like, oh, so many conflicts, I'll just scrap it and start over. Terrible idea. You shouldn't do that. There are actually Git tools that allow you to avoid things like that. But most people don't get there. So that, in a market that was suddenly exploding with forges, more than previously managed, a push towards AI, and new developers coming into the market with almost zero Git experience, if any, all adds up to Git being an ill-used tool at best. It's kind of a second-class citizen to LLMs and code agents. And Git really isn't to blame. It hasn't changed much in 20 years. Like, it really hasn't changed much in 20 years. But our focus on its importance has. Probably everyone in this room knows that Git is one of the most important tools they use, and yet you probably know 5 or 6 Git commands. These are the ones you use every day. You absolutely know. I bet everyone in this room absolutely knows what every single one of these things do because you use them so many times. But you don't think about it. It's just motor memory. This is just scratching the surface, though. 6 Git commands. How many people know how many commands are in Git? Nobody's brave. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. There's well over like 3,000 Git commands, and you know about 6, and that's okay. Like, I only know about 6 too, and I work at a company that does Git stuff. It's totally fine. But strangely, like, even though it was motor memories, these muscles start to atrophy, and that's bad for older developers. But what's worse is young developers are less and less Git literate. They don't know about these developer tools. They're coming in without having the advantages that we had. Git matters in the modern era because even after all these years, it's still the de facto method that we all use for version control. It's built for scale, still built for scale, and it's the best option for keeping track of your code. If anybody wants to talk to me about JJ or some of the other things that are coming up, I'm happy to talk about that after the talk. But right now, it's still leaving things like Mercurial and other version control concepts behind because it's so easy and it's so easy to use. It comes preloaded on every computer everywhere. And especially with you combine it with GitHub and GitLab, it just becomes an easy tool set. The fact that it was built to scale purposefully, that was part of its design. It had to move along with the Linux kernel, so that made it a massive project. But again, so few people are actually using what's going on. Try to think of a piece of software that works for you as powerfully as Git. Can you? I can't either. Like, it's really tough to imagine something that's as powerful as Git that you use every day. So Git one, it's ubiquitous. End of story. That said, nowadays our code bases are larger, teams are more widely distributed, and deployment cadences have accelerated dramatically. When I first got involved with computing, like, you would deploy once a year. That was pretty common. That was like, here's the new version. Congratulations, you got a new version. That's great for a language. It's not really great for a piece of software. A few years ago, I was talking to someone from Etsy. They actually deploy their website 26 to 30 times a day. That's a lot, but that's actually not uncommon. So luckily, Git can kind of handle that. It's not so bad. But going back to the Git fluency, using those same 6 daily commands, and it doesn't mean that like we're Git power users. We're not leveraging this as much as we could. It's successful, but we need to wonder about the depth of its success. I mentioned earlier the lack of Git education, especially for new developers. When I went to school, and you could tell because my beard is white and my hair has left my body, but we didn't know Git was a thing yet. Like that wasn't a thing when I was developing. It was great when it started to become a thing because every conference, regardless of the language, was doing workshops on Git and how to learn Git and how to leverage Git. And then all of the schools started to do it, and then the boot camp started to do it. So for a while, Git was the thing. But now it's like, why don't you learn to leverage an LLM instead? Why don't you figure out how an agent can actually help you? Why don't you just use Copilot to do it? And so these developers are coming into the world without any kind of Git knowledge. Why did that happen? So the first obstacle that we have to widespread Git adoption is the enterprise. And for those of you who don't know, the enterprise is defined as enterprise software is specialized computer software designed to meet the complex need of larger organizations. That sounds like kind of a BS definition to me, but that's like the definition that's given for enterprise. Just means really big stuff at really big companies. Generally, these large organizations, and I'm thinking here not just of like a Google, but like an IBM, an Oracle, the old ones, the ones that have been around forever, they move at a much slower pace. They've only started adopting Git in the last 10 years. So halfway through Git's life, they discovered Git. It's kind of wild to think they still don't have a lot of adoption for open source, or they say they do, but they don't really. And so when you think about things like that, having GitHub as your version control manager, or Git as your version control manager, and then GitHub as a public thing that you can use, these organizations can't do it that fast. The enterprise is always woefully behind. And this includes lifelong enterprise engineers who are never fully familiarized with the correct way to take advantage of something like Git. Then we have customization. Everybody wants to build their own thing. If the enterprise has a custom solution, shouldn't everyone ditch the norms and attempt to build something that makes sense to them? Custom workflows, custom tooling, forks of things, forks of Git, forks of repo tools. Like all of these things they sound logical. Build it for me, not for everyone else, right? I'd argue that building custom tools only makes sense when you're a tool building company. I work at a tool building company. That's what we do. So if we bend the rules on Git a little bit, we can. We help to write Git. We have contributors to Git. We understand how that functions. If you're working at a place like, that does e-commerce, why are you building developer tools? That's not what you do. Don't focus on building custom tools for a team that isn't custom tool builders. Leave it to the folks who are professionals. Another obstacle is lots of distractions. Has anybody noticed there's distractions in tech? Just over the past, I don't know, let's say 10 years. Hey, blockchain's going to solve all of our problems. Web3 is the answer because everything has to be decentralized now. AI agents will solve all your problems. This is like, we found the golden hammer. Everything's great. We fix it all. Everything's going to be perfect. Distractions, though, they're just that. Day to day, we still need to build code. We need to write code. We need the tools that help us write code. And those distractions, as much as we love them, don't really help. Advanced Git is hard. Remember when we talked about like the few daily commands everybody knows? What happens when there's a conflict or a problem? Panic. You Google something, you get a Stack Overflow article from 2012 that hopefully has the right answer. You ask an LLM, 50-50 chance that it's right, at best. Because the LLMs, they know what coders know, and most coders know 6 commands. So they're just as misunderstanding as everything as you are. Many junior developers aren't learning Git, so they don't even know how to look up these things. Version control is secondary to learning the skills needed to write code, and that's sad. If we don't understand our developer tools, we can't be the best developers we can be. And one of the biggest drawbacks for young developers just reaching the job market is that Git and version control in general is not the focus that they learned. So they come in not learning it, and there's very little onboarding for it. How many of you have spent time with a junior developer, a new developer to your team, teaching them your Git workflow? The lack of hands tells me everything I need to know. It boils down to if someone doesn't come in and knowing exactly how your workflow works, you have to invest the time to get into it, or they are bound for failure. Then, of course, is the 800-pound gorilla in the room, artificial intelligence. I will not waste your time by telling you how artificial intelligence is more artificial than intelligent. They are LLMs. They are large-scale databases that you can query without using SQL. That's it. They don't think. They don't reason. They know what they know. Kind of like a 3-year-old. Even at Git Butler, though, we use AI integration because everybody has to. But what does that mean for Git itself? Is this another layer of abstraction from people understanding what's going on when they execute Git commands? And if so, does that make it harder to really understand when something in Git goes wrong? Oddly, though, AI is also one of the first tools that we can look at when it comes to improving our Git workflow. How many of you are using agents or some form of LLM assistance in your daily or weekly work? Yeah, just about everybody. Does it help or hinder you? Do you think it's If you think it makes you faster, raise your hand. If you think it slows you down, raise your hand. You're more realistic than most of the people in this room. Statistically, it slows you down. They found there was a study that was done by Forbes. Most developers are actually slowed down and get less work done with LLMs because they're busy fidgeting with the LLM and not writing the code. But these are things we need to consider when we think about our Git workflow. So we know everyone needs Git, but we don't always see the productivity gains of really leveraging it to its fullest. When it comes to things like new team members recovering from incidents, both catastrophic or fairly straightforward, even things like compliance, which is a major sticking point for enterprise businesses, all of this is affected by our Git workflow. If we treat Git and our workflows as a second class citizen, we end up with problems that are less clear, and we know there's an issue, but the issue is so buried in our workflow, we often can't find it. And there's so many other moving parts in your workflow. It's hard to keep track of the latest everything tool for everything. So we've traveled so far from websites that are HTML and CSS with a little bit of Python or PHP on the side to process some forms or some payments, like having some JavaScript on the front end to do the dynamic parts. We're not there anymore. We don't build sites that are just Python and Django or Ruby on Rails or whatever. They're gigantic megaliths of Python backends with Ruby processing engines and JavaScript front ends, and everything's going on. We're not writing pure code in anything anymore. That changes the way your Git flow works too. This means our skills need to be top notch. While Git itself is slow to change, this modern landscape means we need to be able to use it in different ways. So every proposal, every generated PR is submitted through a Git branch. Tools like Copilot, Cursor, Windsurf, whatever you're using, agents, they don't compete with Git. They're built on top of it. Don't think of it as it's a separate thing. It's something that's supposed to be working with Git. They use Git diffs to understand what changed. They use commit history to understand context. They use blame data to understand risk. And if you have a messy Git history, vague commit messages, giant PRs with no explanation, no branch strategy, your branches are just kind of all over the place, you're feeding garbage to these contextual engines. And as we've always said in tech, garbage in, garbage out. Good Git hygiene makes you a better developer, and it makes your AI tools, if you're leveraging them, better at helping you. That's compounding the advantage. After all this, it's possible to start speculating what might happen to Git as time passes. As I said, it's 20 years old. One of the things we can speculate is these AI companies are going to attempt to build their own forges. They've already started to say they're going to do that. It's not a surprise because they have to find some way to make money because they're not making it with AI. But they want to build these things. They want to be less based on open source things like Git, because if it's proprietary, they can profit. If it's proprietary within a system, it goes back to the problem of customization that we talked about earlier. All these tools will be customized and they won't exactly be usable by everyone. Copilot's a perfect example. Copilot is built for Microsoft use. It's not built for you. It's built for them to easily see what you're doing. That way they can ingest it and make Copilot better. So this isn't to say that Git can't handle all these changes and work within an AI organization. It's more to say that the modern philosophy of AI native development to build proprietary tools that make sense is like an easy way to lose the build, lose the flow, lose the sense of open source that we have right now. Beyond the AI factor, we'll probably see more visual-based systems. So mentioning all those younger developers that are coming in, they're used to using things like GitHub Desktop. They're used to using tools like Git Butler. They are not used to using the command line, which is really where you can take advantage of Git. People are using the CLI emulator in VS Code, which is not a full terminal. It is a handicapped terminal. It is basically kind of short-legged so that it can give you the stuff, give you the feedback more quickly. People prefer things with simple commands. They want GUIs and TUIs. They don't want, something that's difficult to use. And this is a commentary a little bit on the way that modern abstraction works. So, and abstraction is not a new idea. Python has abstractions. Ruby has abstractions. JavaScript is an abstraction. We don't work on bare metal, and I'm not saying that we should work on bare metal because that's crazy. But these frameworks are in and of themselves an abstraction, and we don't learn as much as we used to as developers. We need to leverage the developer tools that we have, and Git is the perfect example. We're moving away from our ability to write straight code, and now we're using created code. We're further away from where we need to be. So what if in the next 5 years, everything changes. No Git, no GitHub, no GitLab, all new forges, all new version control, AI overhanging everything. We don't need to worry about conflicts, or Git crashes, or code that goes awry, or tests that don't work. That would be awesome. Like that would be utopian. Like in the next 5 years, if that could happen, I would be so happy. But it's pretty unlikely. We don't focus on building the things that we need to. Git is how we get things done every day at the moment. And for now, there's no reason to believe that's going to change. I think Git's going to be around probably for at least another 10 to 20 years before we get an actually useful tool that can compete. So maybe we'll see more incremental change as new tools emerge and make it easier to interact with. But in general, people are going to continue to use Git. It is our past, it is our present, it is our future. So, of course, all this speculation and stuff is nothing without practical advice. If you're an early developer, take the Get It Done course at learninggitbranching.js.org. It's a great place to start, and don't concern yourself if you're, pushing code or you're pushing documentation or just making grammar and spelling checks, doing translations. These are all great ways to get used to using Git without having to really worry about the code part of it. If you're like me and you've been around the block a couple times, start learning the more advanced functions of Git. Really dig into your Git skills. I was at a conference recently and someone was like, "Well, yeah, I know those 6 commands." I was like, "Yeah, like you probably know cherry picking." They're like, "I'm cherry what? What about stashing and popping?" They're like, "I have no idea what you're talking about. It's a completely different language." I'm like, "Okay, those are basic Git things." So I mean, they're not hard to learn. They're easy to figure out. So just dig in a little bit and learn a little bit more. You don't have to read the Git book. Our founder wrote it and he knows nobody reads it. It's okay. It's just a reference. But we can erase that from the tape, right? Like you don't anyway, but if you're a senior developer and you've been around, maybe you're moving more towards a management thing or project manager or whatever, you understand everything's going on. Make it easier for the people who are onboarding to learn your Git workflow. Make it easier for your mid-level developers to understand why a workflow might change or why you might need to use it. Making this easier is what it's all about. And I can't say this enough. Start documenting your Git workflows. There's probably a lot in there that you yourself don't understand because you focus on those 6 or 7 commands. Document your Git workflow, get it down, understand it, internalize it, and then share it with everyone else. Of course, you can always use Git Butler tool system to help you. I'm legally obligated to say that, regardless of where you are in your career. So, to recap, Git is 20 years old. It's part of everyday developer tool set. Every one of us uses it every day, but it's not something you think about improving probably. It's not something that occurs to you. We need to create a space for newer developers and people who are less familiar with Git to learn and get up to date as quickly as possible. AI might be able to help here, but it's tough at the moment. Most AI engines don't, most LLMs don't think about ingesting things about Git. They're much more concerned about coding languages and things like that because that's what people want to use. They want to vibe code everything. How many of you have vibe coded anything useful? Thank you. That's not the point of the talk, but I just like to know. So, I mean, let's keep an eye on Git. Let's see where things go. Let's work on making it better because we use it on a daily basis. And the future is all potential. We decide how things will be for the next generation of developers. So let's leave them in a better place than where we were when we walked in. Thank you.